Okay, so starting off today's show, there was a report that dropped late Thursday night, and according to Chris Sims of NBC, there was a rumor that the Seattle Seahawks called the Cleveland Browns in 2018 and that they offered quarterback Russell Wilson to the Cleveland Browns for the number one pick in the 2018 NFL draft. And personally, I have never heard that before, and I did listen to a little bit of Cleveland radio over the last couple days. They apparently have never heard that report before, and Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk did follow up and said, per a source with knowledge of the situation, the Browns contend that the idea was floated conceptually, but the discussion did indeed happen. At the time, the Seahawks were staring at another extension for Wilson, one that would result a year later in the contract with a new money value of $35 million per year and a placement of a no-trade clause, and the contract was indeed influenced by chatter regarding the potential trade to Cleveland. Florio also went on to say that said some who are close enough to the situation to know what may happen believe that Wilson will eventually be traded. Intriguing potential destinations would include, in their view, the Cowboys, the Raiders, and Saints, or any other team that doesn't try to establish the run for 3 quarters and ask him to save him in the fourth. And when I heard this report, it's pretty wild. A lot of people are going to say that this just wasn't true, and I do get that it is so tough for anyone to really rationalize this and try to understand what Seattle would be trying to accomplish even with only a year left on Russell Wilson's deal, and that they got the deal done a year later. But why would you, when you're working toward a new deal, why would you trade him? Looking at this in 2018, and I think in this conversation, it's very important. You have to keep in mind that these talks didn't happen today. It happened 2 years ago. And I understand at the time Russell Wilson was still a really good player. And, we're going to go a little bit deeper into that and what exactly both sides were thinking at the time. Once again, very important. So I'm going to kind of break this down from what I think happened from both teams' perspectives in 2018, right before that draft. Looking at this in 2018, you see that Russell Wilson had won the Seattle Seahawks a Super Bowl, and he had gotten you to another one the following year. Excuse me, but we now view Russ with the last 2 years he's had very differently than how we viewed him before those 2 seasons and coming off of the 2017 season. However, I will also say that from 2012 to 2017, I would have zero feeling why Seattle would want to trade him, especially when he was in the prime of his career. At the time, though, Seattle was moving in a different direction. Coming off that 2017 season, all of their big-time players from that Super Bowl team, the core of the Legion of Boom, Sherman, Chancellor, and Cliff Averill, and Michael Bennett, those 4 guys that made up a big part of that defense, were all gone. So maybe Seattle was just trying to just blow the entire thing up. But here's the thing, though. Even if they were, would it make sense for them to try to trade Russell Wilson for the number 1 overall pick? And here's my answer. I wouldn't do that, personally, if I was Dan Snyder running the Seahawks. But at the same time, I wouldn't be shocked if the Seattle Seahawks considered it. And I'll explain what I mean. If Seattle could get the number 1 overall pick and just move in a different direction, I wouldn't be shocked. In 2017, they went 9-7 and missed the playoffs. And I feel like going into 2018, they didn't have any real expectations. I actually looked this up in going into the 2018 season. So this is from July 5th, 2018. The Seattle Seahawks were plus 220 to make the playoffs. That means the people in Vegas who, this is their job, is to predict everything that goes on. They predicted that the Seattle Seahawks, odds are, wouldn't make the playoffs in 2018. And they did make it on the back of Russell Wilson. But going back to this in 2017, going into 2018, they didn't have any expectations, as all those guys were gone from that Legion of Boom team. But I feel like that is when Russell Wilson also really established himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the game. Now, in that 2018 draft, Seattle could have looked at Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson in that draft. And I would rather have Russell Wilson than all those guys. But if you're Seattle, and this is very important, with Russell Wilson's contract expiring and where you were as a franchise, I wouldn't be shocked if this report was true, because Russell Wilson literally turned the Seahawks around by himself in 2018. They were going downhill fast. The first 9 games of the 2018 season, and any diehard Seattle Seahawks fan listening to this podcast could definitely back me up on this. Seattle started off 4-5 and then ended up winning 6 of their last 7 games and ended up making the playoffs. And once again, even though Russell Wilson is a god, going into the 2018 season, the Seattle Seahawks didn't have many expectations. All they really had that the common NFL fan knows is Russell Wilson and Earl Thomas was still on that team. There weren't really that main group of guys that was on that Seahawks team that really stood out to you, but still Russell Wilson was able to lead them to the playoffs. And Seattle has learned from what Russell Wilson could do when he's the center of the team and after they moved on from those guys. And the last 2 years, Russell Wilson has been great. He's been awesome. He's been one of the 2 or 3 best quarterbacks in the league. And there were always some that questioned him and what he would be without the vintage Legion of Boom Seattle team and the defense that he had around him. But really, all he's done the last 2 years is put up MVP-type numbers. He's that good. The only problem was in 2018, Patrick Mahomes threw 50 touchdowns, and last year Lamar Jackson and Russell Wilson were really neck and neck the whole way, but Lamar just ran away with it. But if you look at Russell Wilson's numbers, the last 2 years, he had 35 touchdowns and 7 picks in 2018 and 31 touchdowns and 5 picks last year for Russell Wilson. And I don't know if I believe Seattle called up the Cleveland Browns and just said, all right, straight up the number 1 overall pick in 2018 for Russell Wilson. But at the same time, I just realized the Browns also had the number 4 pick in that draft. So maybe that pick was also involved. Is that enough for Russell Wilson? I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't trade him, but you have to remember, the quarterback position is the most important position, not only in the NFL, but really in all of sports. You have that franchise quarterback, so why would the Seattle Seahawks trade him? Is it because they were going to be moving in a new direction? I guess, but I don't know if that's really the answer I'm looking for to trade one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And I don't know. I don't know if Seattle really thought at the time that Russ was that. I think they just kind of looked at him and said, all right, this guy was great for our franchise, but you could just clearly tell he has 1 year left on his contract and the rest of the team is just moving in a different direction. Maybe Seattle did try to actually shop him. I actually wouldn't be shocked if they did. The only problem is he was still the face of the franchise at the time. If I were to predict what actually happened, I think they had conversations, but it was never a legit possibility. But if you're Seattle and you made this move, odds are you're getting bashed. If the Browns had a deal in place and got Russell Wilson, and then turned it down, all I have to say is oof. The Browns can be that dumb, though, right? Even though they have done their fair share of dumb things in the past. Like, is there any way the Cleveland Browns could have actually passed that deal up? Yet again, though, we have seen them trade out of picks. In 2016, they traded out of the number 2 pick, and they could have gotten Carson Wentz. The next year, they had the number 1 pick, and they took Myles Garrett, who's a good player, but they took him over Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. So the Browns over the years have had their difficulty managing the draft. So we all know the Browns haven't drafted well when it comes to quarterbacks, but I don't get this one. We have heard a lot of rumors about it, but I don't know. If they were close to a deal, why would Cleveland turn the deal down? On the other hand, why would Seattle be open and try to trade Russell Wilson? They also ended up paying him the next year, but to be honest, I think that was because of his 2018 season and that he showed that he could be the center of attention and the guy in Seattle. There is also an idea mentioned in the report that Russell Wilson could be traded again, and I totally understand, like, you're never going to say never, but especially any time about players finishing their career in one uniform, especially when you've seen what has gone down this offseason with Tom Brady. But if you look at it right now, it looks like Russell Wilson is really at the peak of his career. He's under contract until 2023. The dead cap for this year is $70 million and then $39 and $26 for the next 3. So if you were going to trade him, it would probably be after the 2022 season. But yet again, he's 34 and we don't really know what will happen from now until then. But with how quarterbacks are playing longer into their careers, right? And we've seen quarterbacks in the NFL recently play into their 40s. Yeah, if I'm Seattle, I would probably want to give Russell Wilson that next contract. So if the Seahawks traded him sometime during the deal, that would make zero sense. I hate the idea of trading him in 2018, but at least I can maybe see why they did it. But if Seattle's talking about trading Russell Wilson now or within the next couple of years, that just makes zero sense to me. I think there's a very good chance that the Seattle Seahawks could go to the Super Bowl or even win it in 2020. I believe in Russell Wilson that much. I think they've done a solid job building the roster around him for a while. Like, I think this upcoming season for Seattle, besides quarterback, is their best roster since, I'd say, within the last 4 years. That on paper, this is going to be Seattle's best roster. Also, going back to the Browns, Hugh Jackson came on the Zach Gelb show on CBS Sports Radio. Zach's a good guy. I've had him on the show before, and said he had no knowledge that this ever came up. But to be honest, I wouldn't be shocked if John Dorsey, the general manager at the time, hid it from Hugh Jackson, as their relationship wasn't great. Like, I listened to Zach's interview with Hugh Jackson, and the whole interview was Hugh Jackson just acting like, oh, he would be shocked if it happened. Like, there was literally, he literally had never heard anything about it, and he was very passionate about it. And once again, there's no reason for him to lie about that. But I don't know. At the same time, John Dorsey and Hugh Jackson's relationship wasn't great, and you saw that as Hugh Jackson was fired halfway into that season. But obviously, Seattle had the franchise quarterback they were looking for. But here's my question for you guys. Let's just say this deal was close to getting down. Who do you guys think made the dumber decision? Seattle, if they decided, all right, we're going to trade Russell Wilson, or Cleveland, if Seattle was all set to do the deal and they turned it down? The answer that comes to mind for me right away would be Cleveland, because obviously Seattle had the franchise quarterback and he won them a Super Bowl, and at least you have a well-run organization and your team was on the trajectory to rebuilding. So with Pete, I don't even know if Pete Carroll would still be the coach if they would have ended up trading Russell Wilson, but Seattle has rebuilt over the last couple of years successfully. They've been a pretty well-run NFL franchise recently. You can't really say the same thing about the Cleveland Browns. They haven't really made the playoffs in a while, since 2002. And maybe Seattle thought that their franchise was heading in a different direction, and that was their way of saying, all right, it's time to move on and just get as many picks as possible. Like, if Seattle were to trade Russell Wilson, odds are they wouldn't only get the number 1 pick back. I had a feeling they may have gotten the number 4 pick back from Cleveland as well. But the bottom line is the Browns haven't had a franchise quarterback in ages. So if they could have gotten him, a guy like Russell Wilson that was established and that has won a Super Bowl before, and they turned it down, I would be absolutely stunned. But at the same time, it is the Cleveland Browns, and we know just the amount of crazy decisions that they have made over the past couple seasons. So this story really did stand out to me. I thought I'd talk about it a little bit, and it's fascinating for me looking at this from both teams' perspectives, especially Seattle, because I remember, man, in 2018, I was when doing my predictions, I was like, what am I going to do with Seattle? Because I love Russell Wilson. They still have him, but around him, the roster isn't great, and still Russ put the team on his back and led them to the playoffs. So no doubt he's a god, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league right now. But once again, if you were the Cleveland Browns and you had the opportunity to get him, I don't know what exactly they were doing turning that down.